Good evening, I'm David Kramer with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. Or you can email me at the email at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the advisories and warnings that we do have out for the state. So all these ones in the interior, starting up the upper Yukon Valley, throughout much of the Brooks Range, down through the Yukon Delta area. These are all for snow and blowing snow conditions. Notice that the ones that are in the more southern locations and out west are going to be the ones expiring soon, some in this evening up to midnight tonight. As we push further to the east, like Galena, we are going to see that expiring tomorrow morning on Thursday morning. And then as we push further to the north and further to the east, they're going to start later and expire later. So we are expecting some to go into early portions of Friday, and then as we move out to the west, we're expecting those to last out until Friday afternoon, but also not start until on Thursday. And then the exception is up here by Kaktovik, where we do have the winter weather advisory also for snow and blowing snow, but expiring this evening around 8 p.m. So again, for all of these, snow and blowing snow is expected throughout much of the interior and down into the Yukon Delta area along the west coast as well, and the eastern portions of the Arctic coastline. Check weather.gov/Alaska for additional details for your location. Take a look at our satellite imagery now. The main system that's going to be causing this problem is out over the Bering Sea, and we can watch the low for this system is starting to push up to far eastern Russia, and you can see the front draped across the eastern portions of the Bering Sea. We'll watch this again. Progression of the front through the central Bering, pushing out further and starting to make its way closer and closer to the west coast of the state, with some of the cloud cover ahead of that system already making it into mainland Alaska, and then the front draped through the eastern Aleutian Islands as well. Taking a look at this loop again, we do have another low out in the Gulf of Alaska that is bringing some precipitation, a mix of rain and snow to areas of the Panhandle. And then for central part of the interior right now, we have some high pressure out over the area from some ridging that we have further to the south of the Gulf of Alaska. As we look at our forecast for the remainder of the day, we do see that high pressure there south of the Alaska Peninsula extending up into central portions of the interior. A lot of the precipitation staying away from the ridging for now, some exiting for eastern locations, starting to push off further to the east, expecting that to diminish later this evening. And then as we have out over the Gulf of Alaska, our low pressure bringing a mix of rain and snow to the Panhandle, starting its push further to the south and east. But the main areas of concern up along the Arctic coastline, we have some areas of blowing snow, and already some blowing snow out ahead of this system, with some of those stronger winds picking up some of the snow on the ground. And then expecting this front to continue to push to the east. Some warmer air further to the south, bringing some rain to the eastern Aleutian Islands. But as we get up by Nunavik Island and areas further to north, expecting that to be cold enough for snow. Behind the system, some rain showers that are going to transition over to cold air, as we do have some cold air coming in, switching things over to snow. So you look into tonight, we can see this continual westerly flow starting to bring more cold air in, but as the front itself pushes into the western part of the state up north, we're going to see a lot of snow in this Kotzebue Sound area, with a lot of wind giving us that snow and blowing snow conditions. As we get further to the south, primarily still snow and blowing snow, but there's a chance for some light freezing rain to be mixed in the Yukon Delta area. And then as we drop further south, going to transition over to rain with the warmer air, so we are expecting rain for the Alaska Peninsula. Behind the system, we are still seeing some rain showers for the central Aleutian Islands, and then colder air transitioning things over to snow by the western Aleutians. Looking out for other areas of the state, we do have some fog expecting to form in the northern part of the Cook Inlet area, but high pressure dominating much of the eastern portion of the state still for tonight, and starting to build in over some of the Panhandle area, pushing off the low to the south. And we are going to see a transition from the shower conditions we're seeing now in the Panhandle that will continue to dry out as we move through the day, or through the night. High pressure on Thursday going to finally drive out all that precipitation, high and dry for the Panhandle area. But as we look out over mainland Alaska, that old system starting to break down, but still quite a bit of precipitation and moisture moving through into central portions of the interior, primarily seeing snow and blowing snow throughout the west coast into the interior and up into the upper Yukon Valley and southeastern portions of the Brooks Range as well. And there's a chance for some of the interior places of the Tanana Valley to see a slight chance of light freezing rain as well, but primarily going to see the snow and blowing snow conditions. Dropping down to the south in the Anchorage Bowl area and Cook Inlet, a mix of rain and snow, and then rain a little bit further to the south for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. We have snow from our westerly flow all throughout the central and northern parts of the Bering Sea, and as we get by the west coast, still seeing those blowing snow conditions. Then out over the Aleutian Islands, a mix of rain and snow for the western Aleutians, transitioning more over to snow further west we go. Then on Friday, high pressure starting to build in, pushing off that precipitation further to the east, and our former low now just bringing in some lighter snow and lighter winds to areas of the northern part of the Bering to St. Lawrence Island. Along the west coast, however, still enough wind to have some blowing snow conditions, and we're going to see that through much of the northern part of the interior, southern part of the Brooks Range. But as we get by the Alaska Range, high pressure to the south, keeping a lot of the precipitation into the Alaska Range and further to the north. And then in the Panhandle area, expecting to see not as much precipitation as we still have the high pressure dominating that area. And then back out here by the Alaska Peninsula, a mix of rain and snow is expected, pushing down into the eastern Aleutians as well. For our low temperatures for tonight in the Panhandle area, dropping down below freezing for most locations, a little bit warmer at Ketchikan, dropping down to 35 degrees tonight. Into the mid-20s for most places in south central Alaska, and then into the teens for the central and eastern portions of the interior. However, ahead of the system that we are seeing pushing in from the west, warm air coming up from the south, bringing a lot of 20s, mid-20s, and right around 30 degrees for areas along the west coast, along the Arctic coastline into the teens for those lows. Then out in the Aleutian Islands, dropping down just below 40 degrees for most locations, including the Pribilof Islands. So you move into Thursday afternoon, getting right back around 40 degrees for the Aleutians, into the mid-30s all along the west coast of the state, into much of the interior as well with that influx of the warmer air. And then along the Arctic coastline, right about 30 degrees. As we drop down into the Panhandle area, getting up into the mid-40s, 46 there for Ketchikan and for Sitka. And looks like Skagway as well, Yakutat all at 46 degrees Thursday afternoon highs. For Friday morning, dropping down below freezing for most locations in the Panhandle. Sitka staying a little bit warmer there, 35 degrees. Into the 20s for south central Alaska, much of the central and eastern portions of the interior. Teens along the Arctic coastline, and then right around 30 degrees all along the west coast of the state, just below there into those upper 20s for some locations, and then in the mid to upper 30s for the Aleutian Islands. Moving into our afternoon highs for Friday, getting just above 40 degrees for the central and eastern Aleutians. However, Shemya staying a little bit colder there, 39 degrees, 36 for St. Paul. Into the mid-30s for much of southwest Alaska, and that's going to extend up into central and eastern portions of the interior as well. And then down in south central Alaska, also into the mid-30s for a lot of locations. A little warmer along the North Gulf Coast, into the 40s for those locations. Up along the Arctic coastline, getting up into the upper 20s, with some places further out to the east getting up around 30 or up to as high as 31 at Kaktovik. Down in the Panhandle portion of the state, we are going to see temperatures right around 40 degrees for northern places, including Yakutat. And then as we drop down into southern locations of the Panhandle, we are expecting temperatures to get up into the mid-40s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
We'll start off aviation with a look at our flying weather. Out over the Bering Sea, we have some VFR conditions out west and parts of the southern Bering, but as we have our frontal system pushing more and more over the west coast of the state, we do have widespread IFR all along the west coast, anywhere from the eastern Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula all the way up to the Seward Peninsula, and then some other areas of IFR conditions in the western part of the Brooks Range and right off the coastline of the Arctic coast. We do have some areas of MVFR throughout the northern portions and eastern portions of the interior. South Central not seeing a lot of MVFR, mostly VFR down there, and VFR all throughout the Panhandle for Thursday morning. As we move into Thursday afternoon, we're going to continue to see VFR conditions in the Panhandle, but we are going to have MVFR conditions approaching ever further into the South Central area with some IFR out over the Gulf of Alaska. The IFR conditions from that front going to continue to spread to the east throughout Thursday and Friday, as we do have some IFR conditions now in the central portions of the interior and then in the all along the southern part of the Brooks Range. Continuing to see IFR conditions along the west coast of the state after that front moves through, and then some VFR and MVFR conditions throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Moving into Friday morning, MVFR conditions widespread throughout much of the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, and Alaska Peninsula. MVFR all up along the west coast of the states, getting more IFR as we get closer towards the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound area. IFR conditions in the southern and western portions of the Brooks Range, and then MVFR conditions throughout much of the rest of the interior and much of south central Alaska as well. VFR conditions primarily for the Panhandle Friday morning, but we do have some IFR conditions just off the coastline out over the northern and eastern parts of the Gulf of Alaska. Moving into Friday afternoon, we're going to continue to see those MVFR and IFR conditions in the eastern portions of the Gulf, but still not quite making it into the Panhandle area, primarily VFR over the Panhandle. Yakutat is expecting to see IFR conditions. Some isolated areas of MVFR expected for south central Alaska, but then as we move north into the interior, expecting to see MVFR conditions that stretch up by the upper Yukon Valley and Brooks Range down into southwest Alaska with those MVFR conditions. Western portions of the Brooks Range and then eastern portions of the Arctic coast expecting to see IFR conditions, and then MVFR and IFR conditions predominantly through the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, with the exception of right in the central portion of the Bering expecting to see VFR conditions in between two systems. So we move out over the passes. We'll start off up north with Anaktuvuk Pass. MVFR conditions are expected. However, we will have IFR conditions towards the south entrance. This is going to be true of Adigan Pass as well, where we have MVFR conditions expected through the pass, but we will have some areas of IFR outside of the southern entrance. Dropping down to the south in the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Marylebone starting off VFR, but dropping down to IFR as that front pushes in. And then for Rainy Pass, also starting VFR, dropping down to marginal conditions. And Windy Pass also starting VFR, dropping down to MVFR in the afternoon. Isabel Pass, the opposite, starting marginal and then improving conditions to VFR in the afternoon. Mentasta Pass also going to improve throughout the day, starting off marginal and moving towards VFR. Tanita Pass going to be VFR throughout the day, as well as Portage Pass. And then Chilkoot and Weiss should both be VFR throughout the day on Thursday. Looking at our freezing level, we can primarily see this area of warmer air coming up over south central Alaska into central portions of the interior as well, with the surface freezing line moving up the west coast of the state and then exiting out over the northern portions of the Bering Sea. For our icing between 5 to 10,000 feet for central and western Aleutians. Then all along the west coast, we do have between 5 and 10,000, getting to above 7,000 as we get up north of the Brooks Range. And then down in south central Alaska and Kodiak Island, between 5 and 10,000 feet expected there. With our jet, we do have a portion of the jet moving through the western portions of the interior, 100 knots out of the south, exiting out at 80 knots. Then out over the Aleutians westerly flow, 95 to 100 knots is expected. Taking us down to 9,000 feet, westerly flow throughout all of the Bering Sea, getting strongest in the central and southern portions of the Bering to include the central Aleutian Islands, around 50 to 55 knots there, dropping down to the 40s for much of the mainland until we get up by the eastern portions of the Brooks Range, 50 to 55 knots there, and weak flow over the Panhandle around 10 to 15 knots. For 3,000 feet, pretty similar flow. We do have weaker winds out over the Panhandle area, 20 knots out of that northwesterly direction, out over mainland Alaska, 35 to 40 knots, strongest as we get up by the northwestern portion of the state. And as we move out over the Bering Sea, still seeing that southwest to west flow, weaker over the Aleutians, 35 knots, getting stronger as we get more towards the northern parts of the Bering, around 50 knots out of the west there. For our turbulence all along the Aleutian Islands, below 3,000 feet are increasing in height as we move to the east, below 5,000 feet as we get closer towards south central along the west coast and interior portions of the state.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limon-Disk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For our marine forecast, we'll start off with a quick look at our ice edge. Still well past Nunavik Island to the south, but still north of the Pribilof Islands. Not a lot of change from yesterday, but we do expect with the strong southerly winds coming in that we will see a push further to the northeast with the southwesterly winds that will last through the weekend. So we are expecting a change of anywhere from 20 to 35 nautical miles of a push further to the northeast with the main ice edge. And that is also true all throughout the Bering Sea and into the Bristol Bay area. Then for the Cook Inlet area, we are expecting some change overall where we will see through the end of the week southerly winds push up the ice pack further to the north, but then over south central we are going to have some northerly winds coming back to push the ice edge back to the south over the weekend, so we are expecting that to rebound to about where it is now. As we look out for southeast Alaska for our marine forecast, northerly winds in the inside waters weaker in the south, 10 knots getting up to as high as 25 knots as we get further to the north. Northerly winds out over the Gulf as well, 15 to 20 knots, becoming more westerly as we get up near Yakutat at around 15 knots. Then on Friday, southerly winds in the central and northern parts of the inside waters, pretty light, around 10 knots, becoming northerly in the southern portion, still around 10 knots. Northwesterly flow out over the Gulf around 20 knots is expected, sea 6 to 7 feet in the Gulf. Then for south central Alaska, southwesterly flow 10 to 15 knots over the Gulf and Prince William Sound, pretty light for seas as well, only getting up to as high as around 5 feet. As you get into the Cook Inlet area, southerly winds anywhere from 10 in the northern locations up to as high as 25 knots as we get closer to Kamishak Bay. And then on Friday, becoming a little bit stronger, 20 to 25 knots for southern portions of Cook Inlet area, 20 knots out of the south for northern locations. Westerly direction out over the Gulf, we are expecting winds from 25 to 30 knots, a little weaker in Prince William Sound, around 20 knots is expected there. Seas 4 feet in Prince William Sound. For Thursday for the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island area, southwesterly winds 25 to 30 knots in all locations. Seas the highest as we get further to the west, 15 feet on the Pacific side of the peninsula. And then on Friday, still somewhat of a southwesterly wind direction, 15 to 20 knots for the most part, a little bit weaker for areas south of Kodiak Island, around 10 knots expected there, and seas diminishing as well down to 11 feet on the Pacific side of the peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands on Thursday, southwesterly winds for all locations, 25 to 30 knots. Seas getting up to as high as 23 feet on the Pacific side. And then for the western Aleutians, getting up to as high as 35 knots with 18 feet for seas. A little bit higher there east of Kiska, up to as high as 20 feet for those seas. Then on Friday, southwesterly winds 15 to 25 knots for the western Aleutians, strongest as we get closer to Attu Island. And then for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, becoming a little bit more southerly, 15 to 20 knots is expected, seas around 9 to 10 feet. Along the west coast of the state, primarily a south to southwest component for the winds, 35 to 40 knots most locations, a little bit weaker there south of Nunavik Island, only around 30 knots. Seas getting up to as high as 24 feet by St. Matthew Island. Then on Friday, still that southwesterly direction, 25 to 30 knots is expected at all locations, and then around 15 feet for the highest seas out by St. Matthew Island. For Thursday, along the west coast, we do have southerly winds 35 to 40 knots. Along the Arctic coastline, still southerly, but quite a bit lower, 25 knots is expected there. Then as we move into Friday, we are going to see winds switch to become a little bit more westerly, 20 to 25 knots along the west coast, a little bit stronger through the Bering Strait, around 30 knots expected there, and then 30 knots along the Arctic coastline as well. For our weather for the remainder of this evening into tonight, we do have a low pressure system out over the northern part of the Gulf that is bringing in some stronger winds and snow, a strong westerly flow. Snow throughout the Bering Sea, warmer by the Aleutians, expecting some rain there, but the main impacts are going to be along the west coast, and then as this front continues to push inland, is going to bring some snow and blowing snow conditions for many locations in the interior and along the west coast of the state, with a chance for some of the more southern portions of the interior and areas around the Yukon Delta, potential to see some light freezing rain. But again, the primary hazards are going to be snow and blowing snow from the Yukon Delta up to the southwestern portions of the Brooks Range. And then as we step forward in this for the next couple days, we are going to see that front push further to the east, extending that snow and blowing snow concern out east. High pressure out over south central and southeastern portions of the state, keeping much of the precipitation at bay. But as we move into Thursday, we are going to see this precipitation spread throughout mainland Alaska, bringing those snow and blowing snow conditions into central portions of the interior. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.